Oh my goodness gracious! It's story time with Uncle Scotty. I am your host, Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. Hydration is important. Also important, washing our hands. Speaking of our own mugs, thank you to everyone out there who's been supporting us, checking us out on Patreon. Some people now have their own mugs. Other people have their own bookmarks. Maybe they named their bookmark Marcus, like I did. This is actually Marcus, and this is Marquise. And I want to give a special shout out to one of our most important supporters on Patreon. Today's spotlight is Isla. Young Isla from Seattle, Washington. Isla, thank you so much for watching Storytime, for letting me read stories to you. Thank you to your parents for letting me read stories to you. And I hope you're enjoying your mug and your bookmark. And thank you for being an essential part of Storytime for everybody. Sending you lots of love. Now, we were reading a new book. We're in the first 3 chapters of Mr. Popper's Penguins. And I have to say, I like our first 2 books a lot. I like James and the Giant Peach. I like Sideways Stories from Wayside School. But there's something special about this book. Maybe it's because I've never read this book before, so we're going on this journey together. Maybe it's because one of the central mysterious characters in this book is named Drake. Maybe it's because I love penguins, and a penguin is the only thing I can dance like on the dance floor. Maybe it's for some other reason, I don't know. But I'm really enjoying it. And just to catch you up, last time, Mr. Popper had received the package. Mr. Popper the painter had received the package from the South Pole. I think that's right, from Sir Francis Drake. And in the package was a penguin. And he took the penguin in, he put it in the bathtub. And then his kids, Janie and Bill, came in. And the penguin was going, ork, 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 ork. And they decided to name the penguin. And do we remember what they named the penguin? Captain Cook, who I think is the name of another famous explorer. Not to be confused with Captain Hook, who is kind of an explorer, but kind of just a bad guy. That's a different story. Shall we go on? Chapter 4, Captain Cook. Call who, Captain Cook? Asked Mrs. Popper, who had come in so quietly that none of them had heard her. Why, the penguin, said Mr. Popper. I was just saying, he went on, as Mrs. Popper sat down suddenly on the floor to recover from her surprise, that we name him after Captain Cook. He was a famous English explorer who lived about the time of the American Revolution. About 1776, I think. He sailed all over where no one had ever been before. I wonder if he was a good cook. He didn't actually get to the South Pole, of course, but he made a lot of important scientific discoveries about the Antarctic regions. He was a brave man and a kind leader. So I think Captain Cook would be a very suitable name for our penguin here. Well, I never, said Mrs. Popper. Gork, cried Captain Cook, suddenly getting lively again. Shout out to Blake Lively. With a flap of his flippers, he jumped from the tub to the washstand. I think that's the sink. And stood there for a minute, surveying the floor. Then he jumped down, walked over to Mrs. Popper, and began to peck her ankle. Peck, 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 peck. Stop him, Papa! Screamed Mrs. Popper, retreating into the hallway with Captain Cook after her, and Mr. Popper and the children following. In the living room, she paused. So did Captain Cook, for he was delighted with the room. Now, a penguin may look very strange in a living room, but a living room looks very strange to a penguin. Even Mrs. Popper had to smile as they watched Captain Cook with the light of curiosity in his excited circular eyes, and his black tailcoat dragging pompously behind his pinkish little feet, strut from one upholstered chair to the other, pecking at each to see what each one was made of. Then he turned and suddenly marched to the kitchen. Maybe he's hungry, said Janie. Captain Cook immediately Captain Cook immediately marched up to the refrigerator. Gork? He inquired, turning to slant his head wisely at Mr. Popper and Mrs. Popper, and looking at her pleadingly with his right eye. He certainly is cute, she said. I guess I'll have to forgive him for biting my ankle. He probably only did it out of curiosity. Anyway, he's a nice, clean-looking bird. Ork, repeated the penguin, nibbling at the metal handle of the refrigerator door with his upstretched beak. Mr. Popper opened the door for him, and Captain Cook stood very high and leaned his sleek black head over so that he could see inside. Now that Mr. Popper's work was over for the winter, the icebox was not quite so full as usual, but the penguin did not know that. What do you suppose he likes to eat? Asked Mrs. Popper. Let's see, said Mr. Popper as he removed all the food and set it on the kitchen table. Now then, Captain Cook, take a look. The penguin jumped onto a chair and from there onto the edge of the table, flapping his flipper again to recover his balance. Then he walked solemnly along the table and between the dishes of food, inspecting everything with the greatest interest. Ork, 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 though he touched nothing. Finally, he stood still, very erect, raised his beak to point at the ceiling, and made a loud, almost purring sound. He trilled. That's exactly what it says. That's a penguin's way of saying how pleased it is, said Mr. Popper, who had read about it in his Antarctic books. Apparently, however, what Captain Cook wanted to show was that he was pleased with their kindness rather than their food. For now, to their surprise, he jumped down and walked to the dining room. I know, said Mr. Popper. We ought to have some seafood for him. Canned shrimps or something. Or maybe he isn't hungry yet. I've read that penguins can go for a month without food. That'd be very helpful in this time of quarantine, wouldn't it? And here we can see Captain Cook amongst all the food on the dining room table and his beak up as he trills. What do they have there? Some fresh eggs, some carrots, maybe some milk, some lemonade with some flowers in it. Those poppers. Mama, Papa, called Bill. Come see what Captain Cook has done. Captain Cook had done it all right. He had discovered the bowl of goldfish on the dining room windowsill. Goldfish. By the time Mrs. Popper reached over to lift him away, he had already swallowed the last of the goldfish. Dun, dun, dun. Bad, bad penguin, reproved Mrs. Popper, glaring down at Captain Cook. Captain Cook squatted guiltily on the carpet and tried to make himself look small. He knows he's done wrong, said Mr. Popper. Isn't he smart? Maybe we can train him, said Mrs. Popper. Bad, naughty captain, she said to the penguin in a loud voice. Bad to eat the goldfish. And she spanked him on his round black head. Before she could do that again, Captain Cook hastily waddled out to the kitchen. There the Poppers found him trying to hide in the still open refrigerator. He was squatting under the ice cube coils, which he could barely squeeze into, sitting down. His round, white-circled eyes looked out at them mysteriously from the dimness inside the box. I think that's about the right temperature for him, at that, said Mr. Popper. We could let him sleep there at night. But where will I put the food? Asked Mrs. Popper. Oh, I guess we could get another ice box for the food, said Mr. Popper. Look, said Janie. He's gone to sleep. Mr. Popper turned the cold control switch to its coldest so that Captain Cook could sleep more comfortably. Then he left the door ajar so that the penguin would have plenty of fresh air to breathe. Tomorrow I will have the icebox service department send a man out to bore some holes in the door for air, he said. And then he can put a handle on the inside of the door so that Captain Cook can go in and out of his refrigerator as he pleases. Well, dear me, I never thought we would have a penguin for a pet, said Mrs. Popper. Still, he behaves pretty well, on the whole, and he is so nice and clean that perhaps he will be a good example to you and the children. And now, I declare, we must get busy. We haven't done anything but watch that bird. Papa, will you help me set the beans on the table, please? Just a minute, answered Mr. Popper. I just happen to think that Captain Cook will not feel right on the floor of the icebox. Penguins make their nests of pebbles and stones, so I will just take some ice cubes out of the tray and put them under him. That way, he will be more comfortable. Wow. And we will find out what happens next time on Storytime with Uncle Scotty. I have been your host, Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. Don't forget to check us out on Patreon if you would like your own mug or you would like to support us and have some stories come to you outside of this place. Also, I keep forgetting to say, but feel free to subscribe and like this video if you can. It always is very helpful. You can probably do that down there, as they say, somewhere. And otherwise, thank you again to Isla and everybody who's been supporting Storytime, and we will see you next time.